Creative Journeys is your go-to podcast for all things creativity. I'm your co-host, Dave Petrosky, chair of the Communication, Media, and Screen Studies Department.
And I am your co-host, Melanie, Venezuelan designer and educator. This is the podcast about creativity, what it is in its many forms, and how we can become more creative in our everyday lives. Okay, hello everyone. How's everyone doing? Welcome really to another episode.
Yeah, hi.
Yeah, so we have two amazing guests today. This is our first episode with two guests. Yeah. We have Derek Taylor, who's an experimental filmmaker who blends documentary and avant-garde forms, and Jeff Slomba, a sculptor who blends analog techniques with digital processes. So I'm not going to go into details. I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yeah, and thank you.
This is the last day of or last week of the semester, and so I've been thinking about creative processes all semester. And at this point, it feels more like triage than teaching. But that's part of the creative process too. That last push of problem solving, and so that's where I am right now.
Yeah, my students are more sort of frantic right now with their creativity, so I'm trying to guide them through that process. So.
Well, I'm a little frantic too, also at this point of the semester.
Yeah, it's impossible to not be like, and it's contagious because when they're frantic, it makes you frantic, and it's just like, what can I do about this? I just need to go in a corner and sleep or something.
Yeah.
That's my way of coping. So this is great. This is a great opportunity for us to get to talk to two of our favorite people on campus, and I admire the work that you guys do so much, and I'm just so happy that you're here. One of the things that we had talked about a little while back was Melanie and I were talking about like who we wanted guests to be, and we were trying to think about ways of sort of changing up the show a little bit. And here I am hitting the mic and everything, but. One of the things that I thought was really interesting is that, when we talk about creativity, we're often talking about something that's very specific and strategic. Graphic design and communication design, where basically, having a very clear, sort of explicit message that's going out there and that sort of thing. And that's a very different sort of approach to creativity than what I think you both do. So what I was hoping that we could do is kind of have a conversation about that whole idea of, the sort of the different flavors or the different ways that creativity can be, it can manifest depending on where you're coming from. Because I think a lot of people don't understand when we talk about creativity, they automatically have this sort of, imaginary, I don't know what they're thinking of necessarily, but it's just like they have this image built up in their head of what creativity means. And we don't really have a lot of time to reflect on like, what is it that we do? And how does that, how does that come into play? And, you guys, I think what really excites me about the work that you do is that you're not afraid to kind of challenge expectations of what creativity is.
Yeah. I mean, I've changed my methodologies probably every few years over the last 20 years in terms of my own studio practice. And with foundation students or intro students, I mean, I do on the first day have this conversation about what is creativity. And I tell them that I don't think it's an innate characteristic that you have or don't have. And I think a lot of students coming in, especially if they're not art majors, are afraid that like, well, I've been told I'm not creative, or I think I'm not creative. And what I say is, well, it's a process, it's a practice that you have to develop. And there are different methodologies and approaches. Some people think more conceptually, other people think more intuitively, and I often offer both those sort of branches with each project. Yeah. But it is sort of breaking through this idea that it's not an innate characteristic. It's a practice. It's a process, and there are steps to it. And and we're going to engage with these steps. And And I don't know if students even know who Michael Jordan is anymore, but I also use him as an example that, he didn't make, I think the story is he didn't make his junior high basketball team. Like he wasn't the most talented, innately, but he worked really, really hard and was the first on the court and the last off the court. And you sort of turn it into a practice.
Yeah.
I'm kind of the same way. Students are often saying that I'm not very creative, and I try to break through that. I mean, it's definitely a learned process, my sort of methodology is sort of like I have sort of I get inspired by other artists, and I try to show that to my students in that, there's inspiration, and I'm always stealing stuff from other artists. So that's just sort of my process. So I kind of agree with Jeff. It's something that has to be learned. And it's, it's in the beginning of the class, that's the process. You're starting the process.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's an important piece to it. Is getting the students to recognize that, that's going to be a different journey for everybody, right? Like, they have to figure out their process, and we can tell them what the steps are, but they got to figure out how to make those steps work for them, because there's sort of the generic sort of template of how creativity is done, right? But you're working within that framework, and there's a sort of a myriad of possibilities that are out there, and just getting them to recognize that, well, they're, as long as you're going through the basic steps, you have a lot of, personal choices to make.
Right.
But I think it comes down to what Jeff mentioned too, putting in the time and working on it early, going late, coming into the labs, right? Like the students that spend more time in the labs are most likely going to succeed and be ahead on their projects, even when they're discovering their own creative processes, because they are spending the time to explore different techniques, ideas, different concepts, try different things, and ask the professor 1,000 questions.
Right. And I also talk about failure as part of the process. And that terrifies students sometimes. What do you mean I'm going to fail? Like, yes, that's part of the process. You experiment, push things, some things go to failure, and you revise and find something new that's exciting, that you couldn't have premeditated unless you went through that process of failure. I still use a really antiquated foundations textbook from 1987. Jerry Block and John Leisure wrote this thing, and they were probably like middling academics, and that they published this thing. And I think my professor had a copy of this. And I don't use a textbook for teaching foundations, but I do use this one 3-page excerpt that is about the creative process, and their model is basically there's 3 steps. There's, especially when you're talking about design, there's understanding, acceptance, identification, understanding, acceptance of the problem. That's the first step, like really understanding what the objective is. And not only understanding, identifying, understanding it, but accepting it too. Like, this is the challenge. I'm going to accept this challenge, and not do something else. And then the second part is ideation. And that's where I talk about these different methodologies. Like some people ideate very conceptually, like they have an image in their mind. And I'm finding more and more students think more conceptually. I think it's because we're more increasingly an image-based society, right? So they're looking a lot at finished images, and so they tend to conceptualize more like that. But I learned more as an intuitive process person. So ideation can also come through material exploration, like take that clay and see what it'll do, bend that bamboo skewer and see when it breaks. Like that's another form of experimentation and ideation. And then the third step is editing, judgment, and analysis. And it's a feedback loop, right? You gotta go back to the beginning in terms of what the objective is. And you can't jump too quickly to judgment and editing, because you short circuit the ideation phase, right? If you start thinking too critically too quickly, you start limiting yourself. And so that's sort of how I, in general, approach the creative process in an intro or foundations class.
Yeah. You look like you were going to say something.
No.
Okay.
He summed up creativity. We're done.
All right. There's no point in the podcast now. We got it.
We got it all.
Yeah. No, I've been doing this for 20 years, or
Sure.
20 plus years, but it has changed quite a bit. And we could talk about how it's changed. I mean, in terms of what our students are, where they're coming from, what they're looking at, what the technology is, like it's changed in the last 5-10 years.
Yeah.
Like, dramatically.
Well, even in the last 2 years, like something like Photoshop has kind of transformed how we teach. Because 2 years ago there wasn't an AI in Photoshop, and now it's like it does AI fills and all these things that.
Well, even the video editing software, Adobe, Premiere has the same thing.
They're really pushing it.
You need 5 seconds more of a shot. It'll generate it for you, which is insane.
That's wild. I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
They're beta testing it now.
Well, that's the thing when you have the beta versions of the softwares. Even with Photoshop, like everything is already included in Photoshop, but Photoshop beta is still there, and you can test all the new features that they're bringing out, or the new things in Illustrator that I still don't necessarily implement because I don't teach lower level classes. But when I see the videos and when I go to conferences, my mind is blown about the things that we could do in Illustrator at this point. But talking about technology changes, because we've all had to, learn new techniques, keep up with technology. I'm very interested in how both of you blend traditional with more like contemporary techniques and how you embrace new technologies. And Jeff, I am familiar with your work because we teach in the same department. But Derek, I'm not familiar with your work, and I've heard amazing things from Dave.
Well, he's my biggest fan. I'm very, very old school. I still work with filmmaking, like film. I still shoot on film. I process my own film in my darkroom. And I'm actually on a project now. I was on sabbatical last semester. I'm actually cutting the film with a razor blade. So I sort of, I learned filmmaking using the technology, but I've sort of harkened back to the old way of making film. So I'm just, as far as new technology, I'm the wrong person to talk to because I still use the old ways. I really embrace the old ways. I like touching film. I like, having the physicality of the medium, much like how Jeff works, I'm sure. So I'm, I have to keep up with technology because I teach it. And it, like you say, it changes every 5 years. So it's trying to stay up to date on what the students are being exposed to, because they want all the gadgets, they want all the new technology. But I'm more about just doing more with what the old like the old time, like Super 8 and 16 millimeter film. So that's sort of my medium. So, but yeah, I still try to stay up with technology. I don't know how, Jeff.
Yeah, I've gone, I think, further to being sort of a cyborg in my practice because I came up, I was in college in the late 80s and early 90s, and my professor was a real modernist, and then after that I went to the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts for 2 years, where that was sort of a 18th, 19th century academic program, and to get my chops in figure modeling, and it was 6 to 9 hours a day of working from the model with clay and learning casting techniques, and I really had this romantic notion of the dirty studio, as sort of a modernist or 19th century, and scale was a really sort of big part of it. Like everything had to be big, and you had to destroy stuff as you're making it, and it was really romantic. And then I moved to Connecticut, and I didn't have the time or the money or the space for a dirty studio. Like it became impractical. I was still trying to make work of scale, and that was really stressful, with our teaching load and jamming stuff into the summers. And so technology became a way of having a studio that was sustainable in a sense. And I do get disembodied sometimes working these things are worked up in the computer, and I feel disembodied, like I need that tactile thing. And thank God for 3D printing and ways of turning it back into objects, because then I can turn it into something tactile again, something physical. And sometimes I do blend the techniques where I might 3D print a mold and then ram clay into that mold, so that I can then, in my small, dirty studio spaces, I can then manipulate that thing physically, tactilely again. And so it is a really blended sort of process. And in my teaching, I still teach the old ways. It's just this semester where I'm teaching a special topics class, trying to teach students how to do things like this, that are using AutoCAD and 3D printing. And what I'm realizing is over the years, I've learned really idiosyncratic ways of making my work. And it's hard to teach that, Right. And so I've had to broaden my understanding of these tools, and it's been a learning process, and the students have been really, sort of generous with sort of taking this on as like, we're going to learn through this together. And that's exciting for me, because I still love teaching carving. I still teach stone carving. I still teach clay modeling. I still teach, those really old techniques. But I'm figuring out ways to do both.
Someone that teaches technology, because in graphic design, I don't really get to do any of the analog ways. I've noticed that students really do appreciate it when we learn together. And as the software's update, like teaching Figma and app design, Figma wasn't really a thing until maybe 2-3 years ago. Mm-hmm. And they're still advancing. So even telling the students the Figma conference is happening this week, if we register online, we can watch it for free. Let's see what we learned, what can we apply. If you see a video that I don't see, let's talk about it in the classroom. And I feel like they appreciate it because it makes them be more involved in the process.
Yeah. And the graphic design students are excellent in this class, because they have that understanding that, the technology is constantly changing, and if you're going to do this, you're going to have to figure it out yourself. Yep. And that's how I've made all this work. Like I watch YouTube tutorials. I figure it out myself, and there's always 5 different ways to make the same thing, and you've got to figure out the way that works for you, and is most efficient for you. And so, I think the graphic design students understand that. The students that I'm having a little bit more struggle with are the students who I think they're technically adept because they all grew up with phones, but they actually have a very, very little understanding of the technology of how it works, because they don't even understand file structure, because that's not on your phone.
Right.
So don't get me started.
She's going to jump out of her chair at this point.
So in some ways, having clay or plaster, no one's familiar with that. Yeah. We're all starting from scratch, and especially now where they even get a little squeefed out touching things or sticking their hands in goo, because they didn't have as much experience doing that, I think, as we did as kids.
Well, I don't do it anymore, but in my experimental film class, I bring my cameras from home, my Super 8 cameras, and I give each student 10 feet of film. And Jay actually was in the class when I first started doing it, and we would go out to like West Rock or somewhere, downtown New Haven, and I say, you got 10 feet of film, and there's a footage counter. Just shoot whatever you want, right? And then, so this is usually when I taught the class in the fall, and during Thanksgiving break, I gave them their 10 feet of film after I processed it, and I go do something with this, scratch it, do whatever you want. So I've had students, they put it in the shower, they dipped it in coffee, they put ketchup on it or whatever, and then I splice it back together, and then we watch it as a class. And it was such a communal experience, and they had never been exposed. So I try to bring like they've never been exposed to film or any sort of analog technology, because everything is digital. They're digital natives or whatever that term is. And it was such a rewarding experience for me as an instructor to see, I have a student here who's, shooting with a 50-year-old, 60-year-old camera, and they're really sort of embracing that. And then, of course, cost goes up, and then I stopped doing it. But it was such an experience. They want to, know about that stuff, because most of the stuff I show in class is, it's a digital copy of a film, just to try to get them, to understand, the tact, like, this is what I do. I work with the tactile nature of film. I'm always saying, I'm sorry you have to watch this print of this film on digital, but it's really quite, you know, it's an amazing film. So it's just sort of embracing that technology. But now they can do that Super 8 looking 16 millimeter thing on their phones.
Yeah.
So it's just sort of lost its luster, you know.
And it's more accessible, but it loses the tactile and also scale, right? Like, I mean, you know, watching a film on your phone it's a very different experience than watching it projected. Yeah.
Well, that's in the theater, that's what they're, you know, that's one of their selling points right now is they keep showing the, you know, if you're watching the movie this way, you're not getting the whole experience, and then they zoom it out. You know, they're trying to exaggerate that. You know, I think the thing that I think is really interesting about what we're saying at this point is, and this I'd like to get back into something that I'm curious about because I think that I see this in both of your work, is the idea that by going to sort of traditional methods and that sort of thing, or having that connection to traditional methods, it's really challenging expectations, right? And what your art's doing is basically showing possibility or showing difference and sort of teasing that out a little bit, and that becomes, you know, provocative, right? And I think that's well, I find that very intriguing because, you know, you could do that by taking the most popular medium or the most current technique or whatever, and try to push it in that way. But what we're talking about is basically saying, okay, well, now let's take a look at the stuff that came before and challenge things in the opposite direction, right? And what do we get from that? What do we gain from that? I think that's a really interesting question.
Right. Well, Derek, you said you rob things from history all the time, and I do too. I mean, so that's where I'm still very much a classicist or traditionalist. I'm harvesting from art history. I'm sort of looking even at classical sculpture through a 19th century lens, through the, you know, contemporary technology, and so I think those layers are really interesting. And so I can talk about art history and sort of the evolution of imagery, subjects, mythology, and technology all at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think going back to technology, it's too easy now to do that, and I want to make it more. My work is difficult. I'm frame intensive with my work. It takes me 6 to 8 months to make a film, and I'm working on one thing. So I don't know why I torture myself this way, but I think I love the film frame, the old school, you know, 16 millimeter film frame. I don't need widescreen. It's just something about that. It's very attractive to me, and it's always been, and that's why I sort of, you know, I still go back. I still, you know, I'm an analog guy in a digital world. So.
Yeah.
You like the dirty studio.
I love the dirty studio.
Me too. Yeah. I love the dirty studio. And sometimes I wonder, is it a generational aspect? Because we didn't grow up with all of this technology. We've had to learn how to use all that technology as we gotten older versus our new generations. I feel like it's harder, and you were both talking about this, having that tactile sensory experience because what your story resonated a lot with me because I feel like I used to call myself an interdisciplinary designer. And now that I'm in Connecticut, I keep going back and thinking, I don't know that I'm still an interdisciplinary designer because in Miami, I had access to all of these studios and I will merge printmaking, natural dyes, bookmaking into the work where here, I don't have access to any of that unless I actually come to campus and use our own studios. So in my own practice, I have gone more into augmented reality because of it, because of the ease of not having the space or the budget for it. But I miss that tactile experiences all the time. And that's why I'm constantly trying to learn new things. And I'm now into tufting, but I don't have the space to do.
Yeah, fibers are hot right now.
Yeah.
No, but you're right. It is faster. Like my productivity has definitely gone up using these tools. Where if I was working on something in the dirty studio, and I've tried, I've had it in my basement. I take over the sculpture studio at Southern during the summers and get dirty. But it's like 6 months working on one piece because in sculpture, it's very process intensive for me because I like all the process. So it's like you model the clay and then you make a plaster mold, then you make a plaster, then you work on the plaster, then you make a rubber mold. And then, and I haven't had access to the bronze casting facilities really since I left Massachusetts. And SUNY Buffalo, where I went to graduate school, was really focused on large scale bronze casting. And we even had a casting institute where we were working on commissions and, things like that. And it really slowed things down. Like I was not very productive in grad school in terms of quantity because it so much process. And then I started questioning well, why am I making things in bronze? And I got more into the idea of materials have meaning and it's not, and the end goal shouldn't just be default bronze because I have this massive facility and because I'm not always going to have that facility and I should question how I'm spending my time. And so it's taken a decade, but, sort of getting this sort of digital analog workflow to work has been a godsend because, I don't have, in the Northeast, you don't have, and in Southern, we don't have studios, right? We don't, unless you have the money and time to get there, right? And so having 3D printers making things in the background, even while I'm teaching is like a real, innovation.
The whole process, for sure.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I think I'm really trying to get the students to be more appreciative of is the fact that, they want immediate returns on whatever it is that they're doing, right? And they expect that this is all going to come together either in a single class or by the time they graduate, they're going to hit this benchmark and then they're going to have everything figured out and all that kind of stuff. And I think that, and I think that we've talked about this in previous podcasts. It's not about that end point. It's about that struggle.
About the journey.
It's about the journey.
Yeah, it's the evolution of the whole thing.
Yeah, because I mean that just saying it took you 10 years to kind of figure out what that place is and how you can figure this out. And I mean that's for me that it's the same thing. It hasn't been necessarily through creation of artistic stuff, but just understanding how we construct human moments, how we create spaces and how through our language and our conversation and those sorts of things that we kind of develop an understanding of each other and what our commonalities are and stuff like that. And it takes time and you can't figure it out. And, I guess the paradox in all of it is that we tend to think that we know everything about it because we can do it, right? We can talk, so therefore we think that we're good speakers, right? It's actually a craft that we have to hone and practice and that sort of thing. And ssimilarly, thinking about things like, the experience of filmmaking, for example, and like what you're saying with phones, the students can do it. But does that mean that they understand it, right? And it's not the point of saying, okay, I do understand how this works. It's how does this work and how is it relevant for my experience? And that's what I think the challenge of, that what I hope that we're starting to get at with the students is that we can be satisfied with not having an answer.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it's also it's lifelong learning. To use an example, I've shot on analog film for 20 years, and I've always sent my stuff to a photo, a lab somewhere, and I lose control of the piece after, to a certain extent with that. And, I'm north of 50, and I'm learning for my own, I'm sort of learning how to process my own film. I've done it in grad school, I've done it in the past. So I'm always learning new techniques. So there's never, I don't know if you'll ever find the benchmark. I mean, to use the example that you used, I don't know what you mean.
Yeah, and before getting into 3D printing, for 5 years I carved wood. And 3D through teaching. Like I always thought of myself as earlier in my career, or even as a student, like I didn't understand how to work subtractively. I didn't, like it was counterintuitive. Like, oh, I'm going to destroy this material and find this design inside. It was the reverse of how I work with clay, modeling from the inside out. But I teach for 25 years, I've been teaching 3D design, and there's always a carving unit. And so now I can think very adeptly, subtractively, but that took years to develop.
I haven't figured it out.
Yeah. But the other thing that is a challenge for our students, I think, is and this is what you were saying about, what is the end goal? It's to be able to think broadly and abstractly and see things from alternate points of view. And that's the other part of creativity, and that's maybe in the analysis phase. Critiques are a really important dialogue because I don't know if it's the phones and the image-based sort of culture, but I find our students think much more literally now.
Yes.
And so it's harder for them to understand that. And I've been using past couple semesters surrealism as a model. The traditional historical movement of surrealism. Like I have them look at things from the 1920s and sort of think about what that moment in history was. And it was a tumultuous time. It was World War I and a worldwide pandemic and, a lot of upheaval, and try to make this connection that without being too overtly political, saying like, we're kind of in this time now. Like, could surrealism, help us sort of navigate this thing and think less literally in terms of what you're being spoon-fed on your phone, in terms of, free, just automatic writing or random occurrence and I think they understand some of that, but practicing it, like I've been having them do exquisite corpses, like, and it's a good exercise to get them out of the literal sort of thinking and see possibilities that, they can't just imagine off the top of their head, because what they've looked at is pretty limited. Even though it's tons of stuff, a lot of that stuff is the same. It's very repetitive.
Yeah, my mantra is, you need to look at the world differently. I tell that to students all the time. And it's funny, I start my experimental film class on the first day with a surrealist film, Un Chien Andalou, which is Salvador Dali and Luis Buñuel.
Yeah.
And that just opens their mind. And it's sort of like the palate cleanser, I think.
Yeah.
It's kind of you got to get them to start thinking differently and looking differently. So I definitely agree with you on that, just to sort of open their minds.
Yeah.
Because, I get work in that class that's just very, very literal. And it's just, you got to think differently. I hate the word outside the box, thinking outside the box, but you just have to think differently about.
Well, and I've said for years that the problem is, you can't think outside the box unless you know where the box is, right? Like you gotta define that,
right?
Like,
and sometimes it's about? A parameter. Like going back to carving, like you literally have to think inside that box.
Yes. Right. That's right.
So I'm saying, think inside the box. Nothing can go outside the box.
Yeah, but I'll add to that. There is no end goal. There is no finish line. There are just parameters or a few pit stops along the way. Yeah. And like, okay, I'm going to reach this level right now, but this is not finished because I'm going to go to the critique and I'm going to get feedback and I'm going to see something that I didn't see on my own because other people are seeing it from different perspectives. So now I can improve this. And I always tell them, think about the future implications or the future research that you're going to have with a specific product, or even if you're pitching to a client, okay, yes, we're asked to do a logo and you're pitching a logo, but you want to upsell.
Yeah.
So how can you look beyond that logo and see the other possibilities that you can offer to your client?
Right. I mean, the other tension in teaching is sort of concept versus craft. And so craft takes a long time to develop. And sometimes you have to let the craft go and say, is this a strong conceptual object? Like as a prototype or an idea, like can we get something really, really compelling out of this, even though the craft is getting in the way or making it visible, right? And so we have our final critique in 3D design, and I sort of had this wild hair of an idea for the last project where in the fourth unit, it's a very formal, I really love sort of just doing formalism in 3D design, where the first unit is like line in space. The second one is planes and light and shadow. The third one is the carving, the mass, and the interface with your body. And then the fourth unit is more conceptual, where we talk about appropriated objects, we deconstruct something, we talk about the meaning of an object in terms of its associations, its physical properties, its extrinsic properties, its impact on the environment. And I usually give them a styrofoam cup to consider first as sort of preliminary assignment. So this semester, it coincided with bulk trash week in West Haven, where I live. And so I'm just driving around thinking, like, what can I bring in? And all the plastic toys. So I decided that's the parameter. And so I filled my van with plastic toys that were just out on the curb. And I brought these things in for the students to consider first.
Oh, these are the ones that are
outside.
I was wondering where all of these plastic toys came from.
and again, it was hard to break through them thinking literally, it's just a dollhouse. It's just a basketball hoop. But what are the meaning and the associations of these things, and what are the function of toys, and how can you redesign this thing to change its meaning? Like, creativity is often subversive. Like, there is a subversive aspect to shaping the world in your vision, right? And so what can you do with these toys? And I got some good results. We'll see tomorrow, but it's always pushing them out of their comfort zone. Like, it's okay to take this thing apart. It's okay to add a layer of your own personal association to this. It's okay to change the object's meaning, but also understand, the meaning of the object.
In filmmaking, you can always break the rules. You just need to know what the rules are that you're breaking. So it's very similar in that respect.
Well, while you're talking about the students trying to see something else or taking it apart or figure things out, I don't know if you know Lauren Tucker. She was one of our guests a couple of weeks ago. She teaches in the special ed department, but her focus is adapting toys.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Cool. So she actually, in one of her classes, what they do is spend time finding various toys and adapting them for different special needs. And I wonder if that's something that maybe you could
I'll reach out,
have her come to speak to the students to see also that perspective of like, okay, maybe if you think about a way of adapting it for somebody else to use, will get them out of their head a little bit.
Yeah, and so some of the toys got adapted for squirrel or bird to use. And this is the project where, again, we've got 2 weeks to do this, so I let go of craft, right, and functionality. And some of them are really, sort of hung up on that. Like, they want it to look good and they want it to be functional. It's like, well, it's more important that these are like prototypes and concept, are strong conceptual ideas, and then we could talk about how the craft could be improved. But that's a great idea. I'll reach out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good connection. A good connection. The other thing, and actually maybe this is a good segue, because Lauren brought props.
Yeah.
When she came, so she was showing us some, and Jeff, you brought some stuff too. Today.
Yeah. I brought a couple of recent things. One is finished, a piece I've shown a few times, and then this one is in process, and I'm really getting into kinetic objects or objects that move. And so this is based on a glycon. It's from one of the Greek isles. It's a false deity from I think the 2nd century. And so online you can get these scans. I used to go to Italy with a 3D scanner, and this was like in 2015, like 2 sabbaticals ago. Yeah. And I would take this 3D scanner. No one knew what I was doing, and I would harvest or collect these 3-dimensional models. I don't have to do that anymore because everything's out there, and even museums are putting their collections professionally scanned up there. And so this is something that I got off the internet, but I'm augmenting it or changing it to, I've put marble eyes inside, and then I'm turning this into like a 19th century automaton that will actually smoke. And so I'm figuring out how to have there's valves in here, and I've got to figure out how to make a bellows that has a switch valve so it can inhale and then exhale through the nose.
That's awesome.
And so that's my summer project. And it's pushing me way out of my comfort zone in terms of, figuring out the mechanics of it. And so those are the things that motivate me. Although I did really enjoy for a couple years making these buckets. Like I've made probably 30 of these different variations of the bucket. And it was the first time I really settled on a series or a iteration of something that I could repeat. And again, the imagery changes. Like there's different imagery inside each one, but having that parameter, the format, right? That circular form, the 1 gallon bucket, and there's lots of reasons for the bucket, but mostly it's that classical form of the roundel or the tondo, the circular composition that is a really interesting and challenging void to fill. And I collage like this. The designs in here are often collaged from 30 different sources. I'm using at least 3 to 5 different software applications to put these things together. And so they're really, I'm a real maximalist. Like I love minimalism. I love to look at it, but in terms of my creative drive, like I just more complicate, make it more complicated, more, set up challenges. And even as a kid, I would do this I would build these impossible things with Legos and they would just fall apart. And I just, it was that tension of I have this vision, I'm going to make it happen, but it's, 80% of the time it's not going to work. But the 20% is just like,
Well, talking about you being a maximalist, you also have another piece that we can't really see.
This one's tiny. And so this is the other thing I love about the technology. So this is a resin printer that uses liquid resin and a UV screen to sort of fuse the resin. And so you can get these really detailed small pieces. So this was a larger piece. Actually, it was one of the tondos that I've scaled down into something that could be, sort of jewelry sized. And it's also, this idea of scale, the monumental became unsustainable. Like, I mean, one, it's very resource intensive, but now I've been doing this for 20 years. I've run out of space. Like, my basement is full. There's a trailer out in lot 5 that's half full of my stuff.
That's what that trailer is.
Well, that's one of. Well, we had to give one to the theater this semester. The dean took one, and I had to move some stuff. But now it's like, I can make tons of these and have plenty of room for them, and other people have room for them too. They will go out in the world. These have gone out in the world in a way that my work has never done before because it's because of scale.
Derek, I want to also if you could just talk a little bit about your current project, sure. Because I think it's really great because I mean we're getting a sense of from the examples what Jeff's working on, and I know it's hard to well you can explain it much better than I can, and I think it's fascinating what you're doing with film and
So I'm working. This started on my sabbatical last semester. I'm working on a sort of. When I was in college, I had 2 choices. I was either going to be a geology major or I was going to be a film major. And I'm glad I chose film, but because geology, there was a lot of math involved. And so, but I'm fascinated with landscapes. And I've always made films outside of Connecticut. So I'm making a film now about Connecticut landscape. And it's just sort of, I'm just shooting, sort of vistas. There's no inherent message in there. It's all in the process. And I'm processing the film, or I'm attempting to process the film now using resources from Connecticut. So water is a big part of film processing. So I'm, down in the Connecticut River with bottles collecting water so I can use it to sort of process the film to sort of to react with the emulsion on the film strip. So, with varying degrees of success, I'm doing that right now. So that's the big project I'm working on. But I've also, my last 3 films have been found footage. So working with the last 3 films I've made have all been about things I'm terrified about. Strangely, I don't know why they have been, but I've been using found footage, but still using film cameras to sort of reshoot that footage. So it's a mixture of kind of found footage and sort of stuff that I shoot. And it's all a surprise at this point. I don't know what I'm going to get. Like I said, I've processed some rolls of films. Some have been successful, some have not. So it's just it's like this discovery process in making the film, which sort of I thrive off of, just sort of being in just with the process. So that's kind of what I'm working on right now.
Yeah.
So what are you terrified of?
My recent film is called Sun Film, and it's been playing at a lot of festivals. I've had a lot of success. Strangely, it's digital, but it's still frame intensive. It's various depictions of the sun. And you mentioned like a lot of these museums have their collections online. So I've looked at various depictions of the sun through art, astronomy, science, and I've sort of made this animated film. I'm terrified of the sun. I don't like to be hot. My film before that, Scenes from the Periphery, was shot using Google Earth, but I shot it on film. I realized I'm very terrified of heights, so it was sort of this aerial view of where I'm from. And the one before that was called The Equatorial Calms, and it's about the doldrums near the equator, where there's very little wave action time. Sometimes ships get stuck out there. I'm terrified of the ocean because there's so many deep, dark.
Can't wait to go through the Drake Passage.
The ocean is terrifying to me. I'll go in the water at the beach, but that's I'll get my feet wet, and that's about it. But there's too many secrets on it. So anyway, it's strange, and I don't go out. I don't set out to make a film and have a message. I don't do any political work or anything like that. I don't have any political messages. It's just sort of an expression. It's a film that I make. There's most of the time there's no real message, and it just sort of comes out at the end after I've made the film, after I've edited. I'm like, oh, okay, that's what this is about.
That happens to me a lot.
Yeah. I've never really thought about being terrified of the sun, but maybe I am.
Well, it's eventually, not in our lifetime, but it's eventually going to kill us.
Well, yeah. But, I would love to see that film.
Yeah. That's online.
I don't like the sun.
Yeah.
I don't like the heat. I don't like being hot. I don't like summer.
I agree. I grew up in South Florida, so I hate the heat. So,
same.
Yeah.
Venezuelan, and then 10 years in Miami. 10 years, way too long.
Yeah.
How are we on time?
I think we have maybe like 5-10 more minutes.
Okay. Well, that's good. That's comfortable. I'm good with that. We usually we're like sort of rushing through and trying to cram everything in. This is good pace. One of the things that I'm also curious to hear you guys think about. Or just talk about is sort of the similarities of the kind of work that you do. And I had given I gave AI an assignment before we came on, Mike, and I asked them. We've got these 2 artists with distinct backgrounds in media and all that kind of stuff, and what are the similarities between them? Like, how are these? And it came up with these sort of themes related to the work that you do. And just taking a quick glance. I mean, it doesn't. We don't have to necessarily go through this point by point or anything like that. But anything that you guys find intriguing that you might want to sort of explore a little bit or talk a little bit. I would love to.
This frightens me.
But we have covered a lot of the things.
We did. We hit on quite a few of them already. But we could put what it actually came up with on our show notes or whatever. But But I'm just curious to hear your thoughts. And you're somewhat familiar with each other's work at this point. So how is that? How does this play out in terms of the way that you guys think about things as sort of contemporaries? As
I like this emphasis on sensory experience. I don't know if we've talked about that, but that's really interesting. For me, it's sound is a huge component in my film, primarily for selfish reasons because I have tinnitus, so I have constant ringing in my ears. So I always start with sort of a temporary soundtrack on my films that oftentimes becomes the permanent soundtrack, whether it's a shifting, I don't know, sound like chord on a synthesizer or something like that. But I often, a lot of my soundtracks are kind of grating, like annoying. It's kind of like, it's a sensory experience that when I am in an audience with one of my films, it's just, that's sort of the comment I always get is that just sort of, it's like I've been sort of enveloped in this environment that what I often think is annoying is viewers are always like, this is really interesting. So I feel like I've been immersed in the work. So I wonder how that.
I remember your piece that you showed. It was years ago at one of the citywide open studios.
Oh yeah,
and it is
3-screen.
Yeah, very immersive with the sound. And I've used sound in my work too. I did a piece with ambient sound where it was about my experience of coming to Connecticut and buying a house in West Haven and being up in the attic and listening, saying, "Oh, I can hear the ocean. I can hear the sound. It's great." And it wasn't. It was 95, and it was sort of the same ambient, like
yeah.
And so I made a couple recordings of that sound and got closer to the street, and then I went down to the ocean and recorded, or down to the beach and recorded, shore sounds, and I made this sort of mix of those sounds overlapping, and then those were. Housed in the recording was on an MP3 player. This is how long ago it was. Yeah. In a carved horseshoe crab, carved wooden horseshoe crab, which is indigenous species to the sound. And then I carved a large veined rapawelk, which is an impending invasive species. It's a large. Well, it's only this big, but I put a speaker in it. And so the sound was coming out of the rapawelk, being generated from the horseshoe crab. So the idea that the sound was sort of embedded in these things. And then I've also started making some short videos because, man, it's easier to transport those than sculpture. I mean, when you're invited into a show and you just send them a Google Drive link, that's beautiful. And
that's awesome,
rather than boxing something up and shipping it and crating it. Like I still enjoy building crates, but it's a pain. But
I think one of the things that's also you talked about found footage, and Jeff, earlier you had referenced the mythology, and I know that AI also put that on there. Sorry.
Yeah, and so this idea of appropriation. And so some of these things are direct quotations, but I think, and sort of what Derek's saying, it's really the alteration of it, or the modification, the recontextualization of it that makes it. I mean, that's the creative part of it, right? And sort of reframing something and finding. Again, this goes back to the abstract thought or the more expansive thought. Like, it can have multiple meanings, right? And if we recontextualize something and pair it with something else or juxtapose it with something else, it changes its meaning.
Because one of the things that I teach a class that focuses on world building, right? And the thing that we start with is always what are your inspirations? Like if we're creating stories in this fictitious world and that sort of thing, what movies, what books, what things have come before that are going to be your inspirations, or the things that are connected, and then sort of modeling things off of the real world and bringing that into the fictional world, right?
Right.
And I think that there's sort of an analog to what you guys are doing through your work, is where it's sort of investigating, properties or taking inspirations and then rethinking them or just sort of exploring what significance they have in a particular moment in time. And that's really I think a fruitful way for students to get at their own creative process. Right, is to kind of think about it in terms of, okay, well, here's where we are, and there's these things that we admire or whatever, and now like how can I interpret that in sort of a modern sensibility or whatever, but not necessarily something that's in the real world,
Right.
right? And I think that makes them more. I don't know if it makes them more likely to just take more creative risks. I think that it does because it's this fictional thing, and then they can sort of appropriate it. But that's my way of sort of breaking through that noise that the students have, or that sort of question of like, oh, am I not creative, and that kind of thing. It's like, okay, well, there's low stakes. This is not a real world. There's no stakes to this, right? You can just experiment and try it.
My students have issues with appropriation because I have an actual project where the first instruction, part of the instructions is you can make a film, but you can't use the camera. So and we go back to like it becomes way too literal, right?
Yeah.
I want them to recontextualize the media. I want them to take it out of context, parody it or whatever, and it's something that it's just very difficult for them to do. So I try to expose them to those types of projects, but it's something that's very difficult for students to sort of do. And I have a long history with that, but I don't know if you have similar.
Yeah, again, some students, in terms of creativity, they think it all has to come from them, and it's like writer's block, right?
Yeah.
And so giving them an object to work with. As a student, I was the same way. Like you had to do things yourself. You had to draw things yourself. You had to. And I was very skeptical of like Duchamp. Like, as an undergrad, you're like, oh, that's bullshit. It's like, no, that's art history. Like that's been decided long ago. And I love Duchamp now. Like I love the fact that he took off like 10 plus years to just play chess. Like that's
He took a urinal and put it on its side and called it a fountain. Or that's
right. And
that's
so,
just badass.
And so I think I understand having a problem with that, where you think, again, it's sort of the romanticism of the dirty studio. Like I'm going to make this from nothing, but there are rules for appropriation too, right? And like in graphic design, like what are the rules? Like you have to make 3 changes, or
we gotta follow those copyright rules carefully. And when we think about plagiarism, appropriation, everything, we can find inspiration everywhere, because anything is inspiration. I can get inspired just by looking at your shirt, or this fascinating future smoking piece. But how do we change things to make them our own? I speak about that in typography a lot with using fonts, because fonts are very expensive. But we have run out of time.
Yeah.
So we do have to end this conversation. But before we go, I do want to ask both of you, Jeff and Derek, do you have any exhibitions coming up, or do you already expect for one of your films going to a festival, or is there anywhere where we can see your work in the next couple of weeks, couple of months?
Well, if you're in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania this weekend, I'll be at the Movie 8 Underground Film Festival. London in June, and Bulgaria. So if you happen to be in Bulgaria.
Awesome.
And it's played at 3 or 4 festivals in the last couple of weeks. So yeah,
That's great. That's great.
Awesome.
I actually have a clear slate. I have I'm clearing the decks to create new work. And so occasionally I do that. Like I sort of eliminate the obligation.
I don't think you have done that since I've met you.
Yeah, no. I've been showing a lot again, these buckets had legs. Like they traveled and they've been shown a lot. But I've cleared the slate, so I have no obligation, so I can see where this goes, because I don't know if it's going to work.
Well, thank you so much for being here.
This was a great conversation. Thank you so much, especially at this busy time of the semester, and taking some time to talk with us. This was really awesome. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah.
And for our faithful listeners, if there are any out there, we're still taking suggestions and things for the future podcasts. So if you want to email us at creativej podcast. That's our email, right? Yes.
I believe you.
Yeah. At gmail.com. And give us some suggestions about topics that we can cover. We're almost done with our first season, and when we come back in the fall, we'll be looking to change things up a little bit. So we're looking for suggestions about what we can cover, and we're trying to branch off campus a little bit and talk to some students and those sorts of things. So any input that you can give us would be great. But until next time, we're going to sign off. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Creative Journeys is a podcast produced at Southern Connecticut State University by faculty, students, and staff who are interested in exploring our creative potential.